What if everything you've been told about human creation was just a comforting lie? Imagine discovering that we weren't shaped directly by God, but by mysterious forces and spiritual entities that challenge everything traditional religion teaches. Edgar Cayce revealed secrets most never dared to hear, truths capable of shaking centuries of belief and rewriting our origins. What you'll see here could forever change the way you view life, faith, and the universe itself. Watch until the end, and prepare to never think the same way again. Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, became one of the most respected and controversial mediums of the 20th century. In a deep trance, he delivered messages that defied logic, blending elements of the Bible, spiritual science, and stories of lost civilizations. His reputation grew not only for his accurate predictions, but also for the depth with which he addressed complex spiritual topics. He spoke not as a preacher, but as someone who had walked among the invisible worlds. And, amid thousands of readings, Cayce made statements that completely changed the way we understand human creation. Statements that, to many, sounded like heresy. What set Cayce apart from other mediums was the precision and richness of detail in his messages. He didn't simply repeat dogma, but described historical contexts, spiritual processes, and even mechanisms of life's manifestation on the physical plane. In his readings, the creation of human beings was not an isolated act of God, as narrated in Genesis. Instead, he spoke of a gradual process involving spiritual entities and cosmic forces. This concept provoked unrest, as it displaced the traditional narrative's central role and placed new characters at the center of creation. The controversy intensified when Cayce asserted that humanity had roots much older and more complex than we imagine. Not only did man appear before Adam, but he also went through phases in which his form was not as we know it today. According to him, the first human beings were closer to forms of light, endowed with full consciousness and abilities that we now consider supernatural. This idea, while fascinating, directly conflicts with the teachings of various religions, especially those that uphold literal creation. The way Cayce presented this information was engaging and almost hypnotic. He narrated as if he were remembering something he had actually witnessed, not simply receiving a spiritual vision. His conviction gave weight to his words and prompted deep reflection. For many, listening to Cayce was like opening a window to a forgotten past, a time when the divine and the human intertwined directly and naturally, a time when the boundaries between matter and spirit were virtually non-existent. The impact of his revelations was so great that to this day, scholars, spiritualists, and religious figures debate what he really meant. Some see in his words proof that science and spirituality can find common ground. Others, however, accuse him of attempting to subvert sacred scripture. But regardless of the criticism, Cayce planted seeds of questioning that continue to germinate in the minds of those seeking truth. His legacy, far from being erased, still echoes in discussions about the origins of humanity. By introducing the possibility that human beings were not created directly by God, Cayce opened a path to new interpretations of our true nature, a path fraught with mystery, but also with hope. For if our origins are more ancient and grandiose, perhaps our destiny is equally extraordinary. And it is at this point that we begin to enter the most profound and controversial part of his messages, the revelation of humankind's cosmic origins. In Edgar Cayce's readings, humanity is not the product of a simple, instantaneous divine act, but of a cosmic process involving multiple levels of reality. He described the primitive Earth as a fertile field for the manifestation of life, prepared by spiritual forces long before the arrival of human souls. These souls, according to Cayce, were fragments of divine consciousness that chose to experience materiality. The crucial point is that this incarnation was not the direct work of God, but mediated by other spiritual intelligences. Cayce spoke of these intelligences as cosmic architects, beings endowed with wisdom and spiritual technology, capable of shaping physical forms to receive souls. These secondary creators would have used elements from the earth itself, combined with subtle energies to form bodies capable of sustaining human consciousness. This vision breaks with the traditional biblical model, as it suggests that the act of physical creation was a delegated task rather than a direct action of the Supreme Creator. This idea, for many, is both disturbing and fascinating. According to Cayce, The first human manifestations were very different from what we know today. They were translucent, luminous, almost ethereal forms that roamed the earth with complete freedom. There was no physical density that now limits our bodies, and communication was done through pure telepathy. This phase, however, did not last forever. Over time, these forms became denser, attracted by the lower vibrations of matter. It was at this point that the creative intelligences intervened to shape more solid bodies adapted to the earthly plane. This narrative leads us to imagine that human life is the result of a complex agreement between divine and intermediary forces. On the one hand, there is the divine spark that connects us to God. On the other, there is a technical aspect planned by these cosmic architects. This revelation does not diminish the grandeur of creation, but rather broadens our understanding of how spirituality operates in a structured and multifaceted way. It is as if humanity were the fruit of a cosmic collaboration. Most intriguingly, Cayce asserted that this creation process was not perfect from the beginning. There were errors, deviations, and unforeseen consequences. Some bodies didn't fit their souls, and certain experiments resulted in hybrid forms that didn't survive the test of time. This reveals that the human physical creation itself underwent adjustments and experiments until it reached the form we know. And, according to Cayce, this form is still evolving. By understanding this cosmic origin, we begin to see humanity as part of a much broader story than that told by religious traditions. We are not merely creatures of a single act of God, but participants in a plot involving dimensions, beings, and events that transcend our current understanding. This perspective opens the door to the next point. Who, after all, were these spiritual creators who shaped our existence? For Edgar Cayce, the emergence of the physical human being was driven by beings who not only existed before us, but also possessed profound knowledge of the manipulation of matter and energy. These spiritual creators, described as entities of light, operated on higher planes but were capable of interacting with earthly reality. They were not gods in the supreme sense, but intermediaries, cosmic artisans, who fulfilled a specific mission to fashion vessels for souls to inhabit the earth. Cayce explained that these entities acted in perfect harmony with universal laws, but they were not infallible. When shaping the first bodies, they sought a balance between the divine nature of souls and the physical conditions of the planet. The challenge was great: to create a body capable of sustaining spiritual consciousness without losing connection with the material world. This task required constant adjustments, like a sculptor refining his work with each touch. And according to Cayce, not all attempts were successful. Some experiments resulted in incomplete beings, unable to maintain harmony between spirit and body. Others displayed extraordinary abilities, but could not withstand the environmental conditions of primitive Earth. This is where Cayce's narrative departs from any simplicity. Human creation was, in fact, an experimental project, subject to errors and corrections. This shatters the traditional image of a single, perfect act, revealing a dynamic and even risky process. Despite these difficulties, spiritual creators persisted. Using their understanding of energy and form, they gradually perfected human bodies, making them more stable and adaptable. This initial evolution did not occur over thousands of years, but over cosmic periods whose scale is beyond our comprehension. And throughout this time, souls awaited the right moment to fully incarnate into matter. Cayce's vision leads us to imagine that, at some remote point in the past, the planet was the scene of collaborative work between different orders of beings. Some of these creators came from other worlds and dimensions, bringing with them techniques and energetic patterns unknown to us. Earth, thus, became a living laboratory, a setting where the divine and the technical met to give rise to a new form of life. The legacy of these spiritual creators would still be present within us, inscribed in our spiritual code and even in our DNA. It's as if we carry the signature of these entities in our essence, a silent trace that connects us to the original purpose of creation. And this connection becomes even more intriguing when we move on to one of the most mysterious chapters of Cayce's revelations, the connection between the first human experiments and the legendary Atlantis. For Edgar Cayce, the history of humanity is intimately intertwined with the enigmatic civilization of Atlantis. He described this lost continent not as a myth, but as a historical and spiritual reality. According to his readings, many of the spiritual creators who shaped humanity inhabited or operated from Atlantis, using it as a base of operations for their experiments with the physical form. Atlantis, according to Cayce, possessed a technological and spiritual level so high that it surpasses even modern knowledge. It was a place where science and spirituality walked hand in hand, and where the manipulation of energy and matter was commonplace. There, the first humans, still in subtle bodies, coexisted with more advanced beings who oversaw their adaptation to the earthly plane. This coexistence was harmonious at first, but not always free of conflict. Over time, Atlantis became the center of a dispute between those who wanted to maintain humanity's spiritual purity and those who sought to exploit its material and energetic potential for selfish ends. This division led to experiments that profoundly altered human nature. Cayce claimed that during this period, genetic and energetic manipulations occurred that made bodies denser and less connected to higher consciousness. These changes did not happen by chance. According to Cayce, they reflected the fall of Atlantis itself, a process in which the quest for power and control of energy led to moral degradation and, ultimately, the physical destruction of the continent. Humanity, in this context, inherited both the advances and the failures of this period. We still carry within us the memory of an era when we were closer to the divine, but also the trauma of a great loss. The link between Atlantis and early human experiences reveals that our history is not linear, but cyclical. Great civilizations emerge, reach spiritual and technological peaks, and then collapse, leaving fragments of wisdom scattered throughout time. It is possible that many of the myths about gods and heroes are actually distorted memories of Atlantean beings who participated in the formation of humanity. This connection to Atlantis not only redefines our past, but also issues a warning for the present. If we repeat the same mistakes, prioritizing material power over spiritual evolution, we may be headed for a similar fate. And it is precisely at this point that Cayce directs our attention to the transition that forever changed human essence, the fall from perfect form to dense physical form. Edgar Cayce described how, before becoming flesh and blood beings, humans existed in a state of pure light and energy. In this perfect form, there was no disease, aging, or physical limitations. Consciousness was expanded, connected directly to the divine mind, and communication flowed like a silent dialogue between souls. There was no fear or need for survival, just the natural flow of creation. This condition, however, did not last forever. The fall began when souls, fascinated by the material world, became attracted to the sensations and pleasures of physical density. Gradually, the connection with the higher plane weakened, and the subtle body began to densify. This change was not sudden, but gradual, marked by choices that prioritized physical experience over spiritual connection. The perfect form became increasingly vulnerable to the laws of matter. According to Cayce, spiritual creators attempted to contain this transition to prevent humanity from completely losing its divine essence. They created more resilient bodies, adapted to the earthly environment, but this adaptation came at a cost: forgetfulness. By incarnating into dense bodies, souls lost conscious memory of their origin and the initial purpose of their existence. It was the beginning of a journey marked by spiritual challenges and trials. This fall is not just a metaphor. For Cayce, it represents a historical and energetic milestone in human evolution. It is the point at which we pass from being almost divine beings to creatures subject to pain, illness, and death. At the same time, it is also the beginning of a cycle of profound learning, as matter offers lessons that the pure spirit could not experience. Physical limitation became a harsh but necessary teacher. Despite the apparent loss, Cayce saw a hidden purpose in this transformation. The dense incarnation allowed souls to develop virtues such as patience, compassion, and courage, qualities that only emerge in the face of adversity. Thus, the fall was not a punishment, but an inevitable step on the path back to the light. This return, however, would require a long process of reconnection with the divine essence. And at this point, the most controversial question of all arises: if it was not God who directly shaped the human body, why would he allow his creation to undergo such a transformation? The answer, according to Cayce, lies in the separation between God and the physical creation. One of Edgar Cayce's most provocative revelations is that God, the supreme creator, did not fashion the human physical body with his own hands. Instead, he established universal laws and allowed intermediary entities to carry out this task. This separation between the original divine act and its practical execution, according to Cayce, explains why humanity presents imperfections and limitations. This view does not diminish the importance of God, but it radically changes the way we understand creation. The Creator would not be distant out of indifference, but by design. The free will of souls and the autonomy of creative intelligences were essential parts of the greater plan. This freedom, however, carries with it the risk of errors and deviations, which indeed occurred throughout human development. For Cayce, God is the source of life, but not directly responsible for the biological structures we inhabit. These forms were designed based on an ideal model, but adapted by beings who, despite their wisdom, lacked divine perfection. Thus, bodies were born subject to wear and tear, disease and death, aspects that, paradoxically, became instruments of spiritual learning. This separation also helps us understand why so many spiritual traditions speak of a return to God or a soul retrieval. It's as if we've been launched on a journey of self-discovery, temporarily removed from the source so that we can experience reality in all its nuances. At the end of this journey, the goal is not just to return, but to return transformed. Most intriguingly, according to Cayce, part of the mission of spiritual figures like Jesus was precisely to restore the bridge between humanity and God. It wasn't just about teaching morality, but also about reminding humanity of its true origin and destiny. Jesus was living proof that it is possible to inhabit a physical body and still maintain a direct connection with the divine. This perspective leads us to look at ourselves differently. If our physical creation was an intermediary act, our essence remains the direct work of God. The body is temporary, but the spirit remains eternal. And this understanding opens the way for an even deeper reflection. How does this truth change our faith and religious beliefs? This is the next point of Cayce's revelations. Edgar Cayce's revelations about human origins profoundly impact the way many view their faith. For those accustomed to the idea of a direct and perfect creation by God, the notion that there were spiritual intermediaries in the process is disconcerting. This not only questions the literalness of biblical passages, but also challenges dogmas that have been consolidated for centuries. It's as if an essential piece of the puzzle has been placed on the table, completely changing the final picture. Cayce didn't seek to destroy faith, but to expand it. He saw spirituality as a living thing, capable of adapting to humanity's growing understanding. The revelation that God did not personally shape the human body does not mean he is absent, but rather that the divine plan is more vast and complex than traditional religions tend to admit. This expansion of perspective requires spiritual maturity to be understood. For many religious leaders, accepting this view would mean revising theological interpretations and even liturgical practices. It would require acknowledging that human history involves multiple spiritual agents, and that the divine manifests itself through hierarchies and processes that go beyond what is recorded in Scripture. This adjustment, though difficult, could pave the way for a deeper and more conscious faith. For the individual, this understanding can be liberating. Knowing that physical creation is not perfect and that we are constantly evolving helps us better understand the suffering, limitations, and imperfections of the world. This is not a sign of divine abandonment, but part of a pedagogical plan that leads us, step by step, back to spiritual wholeness. Faith, in this context, ceases to be merely blind belief and becomes an active search for understanding and connection. It's no longer about waiting for an external miracle, but about consciously participating in the process of self-improvement. This is a radical shift. Religion as an instrument for expanding consciousness, not just a ritual of worship. This new perspective also opens space for reconciliation between science and spirituality. If human creation is the fruit of a cosmic process, both scientific research and spiritual experience can work together to unravel our origins and our destiny. It is this integration that leads us to the final point, the return to the original state. For Edgar Cayce, the human journey does not end with physical life, but with a return to the luminous and perfect condition we had before the fall. This return is neither automatic nor guaranteed. It is the result of choices, learning, and purification over multiple incarnations. Life in matter is a school, and each experience, however painful, is a lesson that brings us closer to the ultimate goal. The path back begins with the awakening of consciousness. This means remembering who we truly are, spiritual beings temporarily living in physical bodies. For Cayce, Practices such as sincere prayer, deep meditation, and selfless service are essential tools for restoring connection with the divine. By cultivating virtues, we raise our vibration and weaken the bonds that bind us to the density of matter. This process isn't quick. Just as the fall from perfect form took eons, the return also requires patience and perseverance. Cayce saw each life as a unique opportunity to correct past mistakes and strengthen spiritual qualities. Reincarnation, far from being a punishment, is a gift that offers us countless opportunities for evolution. Returning to the original state also implies reconciliation with God. It's not just a return home, but a transformed, wiser, and more conscious return. It's the full realization of the divine purpose, that souls, after exploring materiality, freely choose light and unconditional love. This conscious decision is what gives meaning to the entire journey. For Cayce, figures like Jesus embody the living example of this return. He came not only to teach but to demonstrate that it is possible, even in a physical body, to live in total alignment with the divine. Following this example is the ultimate invitation his revelations extend to us, not only to know the truth, but to incorporate it into daily life. Thus, the story of humanity, according to Cayce, is not a tale of eternal loss, but of redemption and glory. We are cosmic travelers who once shone as pure light and who, after traversing the shadows of matter, will return to that same light, this time with the wisdom gained along the way. This is the promise and the destiny he invites us to embrace. We conclude this journey with a truth that challenges and inspires. According to Edgar Cayce, our story did not begin in clay molded by the hands of God, but in light, energy, and consciousness, guided by spiritual architects fulfilling a much greater plan. This revelation does not diminish our connection with the divine. On the contrary, it expands it, showing that we are part of a constantly evolving cosmic plot. Each life, each choice, and each challenge is a stage on this journey back to our luminous essence. And perhaps understanding this is the first step to living with greater purpose. And now I ask you, what if everything you believed about human creation is just the beginning of a much deeper story? Leave a comment and share your reflections. Let's build this spiritual dialogue together. If this video touched your heart and opened new horizons, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss future content. Share this video with friends and family so more people awaken to this transformative truth. After all, the search for origin is also the search for destiny.